Grab a cup of joe and let's gather round that hay bale. With your hosts, Anne from Andale Homestead, Casey from Ormsby Farms, Monica from Bland's Promised Land Ranch, and Sandy from Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona. Here they are. Hey, y'all, hey.
Hey, y'all, hey, it's Ann with Andale Homestead.
And this is Sandy with Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona.
I'm Monica from Bland's Promised Land Ranch.
Hello, everyone. It is Casey over at Ormsby Farms. And y'all, this is the Monday before Easter. So we hope everyone is having a wonderful week. Yes. And we are talking about turning water into wine. We all know that beautiful story where Jesus did it at a wedding.
That's right.
But we're going to go into a little bit of depth of talking about the making of wine and why you need to know this skill. But I first will say, if you are listening to us on a podcast app and you want to see our wonderful pre-Easter faces, come over to YouTube. You can always click our QR code that is in our description, or just type in Around the Hay Bale at YouTube and come over and you will get to see us face to face. So we're talking turning water into wine. We talked a little bit before we started recording, and I know Monica and Ann were both like, well, we're going to smell real pretty for this episode. But I'm going to start with you, Sandy.
Yeah,
let's talk about the benefits of making your own wine. Because listen, you may not be a wine drinker, and that's okay. But why is it important to have this skill to make your own wine?
Well, I think that the more skills that you can learn in any situation, the better. I learned how to make wine. Actually, my grandmother would make wine. She would make grape wine. She would make choke cherry wine, rhubarb wine. And so it was something that we grew up with. Now, I'm not really a wine drinker, but I do love to make wine. I love the whole process. I love to give it away, to trade. It is good medically for you.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot, but it doesn't hurt you, and it can help in certain situations to use the wine.
That's right.
And have you ever made wine before?
I have never made wine. I have watched a lot of people on YouTube. So, it's kind of like playing a doctor. I'm not a doctor, but I play one. I have watched, there's a number of different things. It doesn't appear to be a difficult process.
Oh, no.
And I'm still very interested in doing that. We cook with wine. We have wine vinegars. There's all of those types of things. We're not big wine drinkers either. Not that I'm opposed to that, but I would love to be able to learn. So I look forward to this episode. So Monica, what are you thinking? Monica's going, she's in my boat. She's in my boat, not having a whole lot of knowledge.
Well, you just said something, and now I'm going to have to really pick Sandy's brain here and Casey's brains, because we were talking a little bit before the podcast and I was asking all the questions, and my questions were like, okay, if I am not a wine drinker and I don't even have really wine in my house, I did buy a white wine for a recipe last year, and it was a small bottle because I'm like, I don't need a big bottle of white wine. What am I going to use it for? And it was for a random recipe that I wanted to try. But I do have red wine vinegar. And I have rice wine vinegar. And then I was like, ooh, I do have some wine things in my house, but it's not like drinking wine. They're all vinegars. So the options that I guess are really there. So now I'm like, okay, now I need to know, how do you make wine? And then once you make the wine, how do you make it into a vinegar? Because is that the same? Can you make wine and then turn it into a vinegar?
Yeah, sometimes it does that without you wanting it.
Like kombucha that over ferments and turns into cider, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
It can just happen. But for me, now there's a lot of complicated recipes online and videos on to make wine. I like to make my wine very simple. I make a wild fermentation of a country wine.
Okay.
And so I'm literally taking the yeast out of the air. Not that I'm opposed to adding a champagne yeast if it was a fruit that doesn't isn't known to have a lot of yeast on the berries. It's
Okay.
not like I wouldn't, and it's not like I haven't before. When I questioned if that berry had a lot of natural yeast on it, but there is yeast everywhere.
I never knew that.
It's on your animals. It's in your air. If you make sourdough in your kitchen a lot, you will have a lot more yeast in your kitchen than other people would have.
Okay.
And it's when you're not adding the yeast yourself, when you're mixing it, like I like to do it in these different size crocks.
Mhm.
That's how I start before I put it in a carboy, which has the lock on there and does the whole process. Um, I have to stir it, and I mean, you really make that whirlwind in there while you're stirring it, and then you're going back and forth, and you have to do that 4 or 5 times a day, so it will draw the yeast in there
Oh
because
my goodness.
yeast is in the air. And I like to, when I'm doing fruit, I usually put it in some kind of mesh bag. Some people use nylon stockings, clean nylon stockings that have never
Sure.
been worn. So it holds that fruit or berry or vegetable in there.
Okay.
And so it's a fascinating process. And like I said before, honestly, I am not a wine drinker. Do I drink wine once in a while? Yes. But my children just love it when I give them a bottle of wine. And then you can start experimenting. About, probably 10 years ago, I made a grape. My friend has grapes and an overabundance of grapes. And you may have an overabundance of some kind of fruit that you've done everything you can think of. Still have more? Use some wine, make some wine.
Okay.
But I added pepper to it because you can add spices and herbs to your wine too. And
Um,
then you can let it sit. And actually, the longer it sits, it becomes more complex. Now, when you're using wild yeast, it's a little more, it's feral. Some people call it a feral yeast. Some people call it indigenous yeast, the wine that you're making, because you're pulling it from places. It's a little more unstable.
okay.
So sometimes you might have a failure.
So how do
Mhm.
you know if you have a failure?
The taste, you know.
It
But
tastes like you want to
sometimes,
throw up.
well, no, I've never had it taste like that.
But I
But
mean, like,
it'll taste off.
if you don't drink wine, like, so if I am like a newbie and I'm like, I have grapes that are like out, like, wild grapes that I have growing in the back pasture. I didn't put them there. They just showed up. Some birds helped me out, I think, a long time ago.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
I made all this grape jelly this year. And now I'm like, ooh, can I make wine out of these Mustang grapes?
Yes.
But I've never had, I don't think I've ever had
She would
wine.
not know whether it was
I wouldn't
good
know
or
whether
bad.
it's good or bad. I would taste it and be like, it's bad. I'm going to die. I better throw it out. Like, I don't know.
Well, you're not going to die from it. No.
No. But like, how am I going to know if it's actually good or bad?
Well, wine is interesting because sometimes it's gone through the whole process. You've bottled it, you put it in the carboy and you put the airlock on there, and it's done all the
And what's a
process of
carboy?
a carboy is I have like
It's like a
gallon
glass big jug.
and it has a skinny neck, and then you push this cork with a
Oh, I have
airlock
some
in it,
small bottles like that. Yeah,
Mhm.
that have a lock.
and no, it doesn't have a lock like that. You have to put an airlock in there, which is this thing that kind of curves around, and you put a little bit of water in it, and so the carbon dioxide pops out, but nothing bad gets in.
Oh.
And when it
Ooh.
stops bubbling, you might have to rack it, which means you're pouring it out and putting it back in. Yep, see, carboy and
Okay.
airlock.
Okay.
See, I'm
Cool.
so bad because I was trying to pull it up.
If you're
There we
not
go.
on, if you're not on the YouTube, then you're not going to see this right now, but we are showing a picture of a carboy. It's not a person that brings you your food at a restaurant to the car. It's actually a carboy, because she kept saying carboy and I'm like, am I hearing her right? And I
I
looked
don't
it
know
up
what
and
that is.
it's got like a little hooja jigger on the top, that little thing.
Yeah, that's the airlock.
Yep.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So
And
it's
so,
for the gas that releases.
right, because what happens is, so you got the yeast coming in there, right?
Mhm.
You're adding sugar, and the the yeast turns the sugars turn into alcohol and carbon dioxide.
Mhm.
So it's literally eating up all the sugar.
Right,
And
right.
that's really when your wine's basically done. I mean, I've racked mine, which you siphon it off and put it back in, and it stimulates it for a little bit longer.
Mhm.
Certain wines you have to are a little bit more complicated. But I have found that sometimes the taste will be okay, and I'm not really liking, it's like it's okay. I'll still bottle it up, and then I'll try it 3, 4, 5 years from now, and
Oh.
a lot of times that complex flavor has changed.
Oh.
Okay.
So honestly, I don't know if I've ever thrown any out. Some of them I thought, kind of a failure, but you just let it sit for a little while. And especially if you're using wild fermentation, it can be
Right.
very complex, the flavors.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you're a
Yeah.
newbie, you might want to buy the yeast or no. If you're just ready to go for it,
See, I never knew there was such thing as a wild yeast. I never. That's
I did know that. I know
yeast.
Yeah,
that.
I'm a yeaster when I make my wine. Like
Okay, so how do you do it?
I
You're not.
buy the yeast
Yes, so you're not a wild
because
yeaster.
I'm lazy.
Sandy is the
Okay.
wild. She's the wild child of the bunch.
She's
That's
She's
the
right.
wild
She-
child,
she's nodding her head. She's like, "Yes, that's exactly me."
and I'm also the wine drinker out of the bunch.
So Casey is the
Right.
drinker and the
Right.
connoisseur.
I am the
Mhm.
connoisseur. I am. I am.
And,
On my
and do you use the
gravestone, it will say,
tablets
"Here
too?
lies wino."
Do you use the
So
tablet too? She said.
have you made your wine made wine before, Casey?
I have. I
All right.
have.
And
Now,
and
I have done it a couple different ways. I have done it with a kit that you
Yeah,
can
you can
get,
get a kit.
again, off of Amazon. They're relatively cheap. And let me tell you, before I go into that, why I decided to make my own wine. Because one, I am a wine drinker. My family, we are wine drinkers. And me and Sandy were talking about before the show. I had some gut issues that I had to look into, and I was like, I'm gonna have to give up, drinking because it's just not good. But I found research that because of pesticides and stuff that we spray on our grapes and fruits here in America, and the preservatives, that our wine is actually not as healthy as, say, a French wine or an Italian wine or
oh,
a Spanish wine. Because they don't use the same pesticides that we use over here, and they don't use the same preservatives. So when you go to a doctor and they're saying you need a gut-friendly wine, what they're saying is you need to get something from Bordeaux or something from Italy or any of those places not made in America. American wine has like everything else that we have in the grocery store now, a lot of preservatives. So that's what started making me think, okay, well, it can't be too hard, right, to make my own wine. Let me try. And so I got the kit, and this kit is really cool. It comes with everything you need to know to make this wine. And I have videos on it on my YouTube channel. I did a Chardonnay one, and I did a Cabernet Sauvignon. No, I did a Shiraz. So a red wine and a white wine, Monica. I know because
okay.
your
Thank
face
you
is
for
like,
decoding because I was
I was
like, I
gonna
don't know
say,
what he just
what?
said. I don't even know what he just said.
and so
Red wine, white wine. Gotcha.
with the red wine, with really any wine, for me, being a wine drinker, if it's going bad, it's tasting very vinegary. It has this vinegar taste to it. Because if you over ferment your wine, mean you let it sit in too long, it's going
Yeah.
to be red wine vinegar or white wine vinegar. It's not really
Okay.
going to be drinkable wine anymore. But also with the yeast and how sweet you like your wines too. Like if you let it eat enough where the sugar's almost gone, that's going to be a sweeter wine. The more you let it sit and eat those sugars, the yeast to eat the sugar, the drier the wine is going to be. So that's your
Right.
difference between the wines. But to answer your question, yes, you can make the vinegar from the wine. Most people say to use leftover wine. I don't know what leftover wine is. I've never heard of a thing. So
Well, in my kombucha, when I'm making kombucha, you use almost all of it when you're
Uh-huh.
doing a second ferment, right? So you have your first ferment, and I have my big giant mother that's kind of laying there on the top like a giant mushroom, and I pull that off, and I use almost all of that tea that's basically now just the fermented kombucha, right? The fermented tea. I put all in the small bottles. I add some ginger and I add some more sugar, and I do a little pop seal, like Miss Ann was talking about, the little pop top ones. That's what I have. And then I put it back in my cabinet for a second ferment. That way it's nice and bubbly, comes out like soda. The problem is when you forget it's in your cabinet, sometimes it turns a little sour and then it's vinegary. But I always leave a little bit. I leave maybe a quarter cup of that original tea that's in there, that little bit of leftover tea, that kombucha. And I have my mother, and I leave all that in there. And then I put fresh tea and fresh sugar in, and that's what helps it. You need a little bit left. So that leftover wine, I guess, is what you would use to start your next batch.
And I like to throw a mother in there. I don't know if any of y'all make homemade vinegars and have the vinegars that are left over. I like to throw a mother in a jar of wine if I'm making red wine vinegar, just to jumpstart the.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I mean, just to jumpstart it to getting. So I make the mother. So I get water, distilled water, and sugar, equal parts is what I've done. And I do a splash of white vinegar, so cheater, pumpkin eater,
So
and
you
I
just
let
make
it
your own
sit.
vinegar mothers.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then you're going to get them. They're like 6 or 7. And they're big old slimy, gross things.
That's my
Yeah,
favorite.
they're like big jellied fish.
Yes. And I
You can
save
make
them
candy
to
out
make.
of those.
Yeah, you said candy?
Yeah, you can make candy out of those. There's some recipes online.
We have spiraled, y'all. We have spiraled down from grapes and wild yeast.
This is the wine spiral.
Candied vinegar candies things. Okay, so wait. Okay, my mind is being
From the mother. Yeah, we're going to
Okay.
have to talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So, but when you're making wine, let's just say you made your wine. Okay, wine is doing it's going. Now I want to make my wine into vinegar because I am only now. Here's me. I'm like I only need wine for the red wine vinegar. What do I do?
Well, first you bottle up the red wine and send some to Casey at Ormsby Farm. And then the other ones, I literally just put the wine that's a little bit old and opened. So you bottle your wine. And as Sandy said, if you bottle your wine and keep it in a cool, dark place, it will age. And wine is made to age where it should. Get better with age, especially red wines.
It ages. It just doesn't turn to vinegar, though, if you bottle it and put it away.
Right.
It shouldn't.
But I want vinegar. So if I don't want to age it and bottle it, what do I do?
So you're going to open up that bottle and pour it into like a half-gallon mason jar. Okay. And you're going to put your homemade mothers in there, coffee filter and a ring, and put it aside for, I want to say, a month. When it starts smelling like vinegar, that's when you're going to take the mother out. You're going to take that coffee filter and put a lid on it and let it sit for another, what do you say, Sandy, 4-5 months?
Yeah, I think it gets better the longer it sits.
But it doesn't mold?
No. Vinegar doesn't mold.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
That sounds.
Let me tell you,
easier.
It sounds so easy, but I have never made vinegar successfully. I tried to make apple cider vinegar, and I was like, I'm following the video. I did it, and I went back to go look, and my apple cider vinegar was a bunch of moldy apple cores with nothing but mold.
well, you probably left that cores in too long. But I'll say, if y'all are listening and you want us to talk more about vinegars, leave a comment in the comment section below, and we'll have to do a whole episode on vinegars because they are fun.
We for sure.
With wine, though, especially for you, Monica, if you're just doing it for red wine vinegar, my suggestion is buy one of those kits on Amazon. They're very inexpensive. They're like $60, but it makes you 40 bottles of wine. So we're talking like almost $3. I'm not really good at mathing, but like $3 a bottle.
120.
Okay. You said what?
120. If you have 3 times 40 bottles, it's 120.
I'm gonna go with Sandy.
$1.50 a bottle, right?
I'm gonna
whatever y'all say.
I'm gonna go with 3 wild grapes and be like, throw them in something, try to figure this mess out.
So let's talk from wild grapes then.
I
Okay.
got lots of yeast.
Yeah,
in
let's
this
talk
house.
about that. Maybe
So
some wild.
we're going with wild grapes or grapes that you have in your grapevine. Does everybody remember the episode of I Love Lucy?
Yes.
So
Sipping.
you're,
She's
stepping-
Yeah.
stepping.
you're wanting to juice your grapes. Now you
Mm-hmm.
may have that really cool machine that Sandy uses to juice all of her fruits, which I probably need to buy one on Amazon. But you want to juice your grapes first, and that's what's going to get your juice that you turn into a concentrate. I've turned it into a concentrate, just adding more sugar to it. Sandy, have you done the same thing? Do you go from juice or juice concentrate?
I don't do either way.
You do.
I put the grapes in a bowl. I take my potato masher and I break them up, so
Uh-huh.
it starts to get some juice. I put them in a bag and I put them in my crock. I'm putting
Okay.
because if you heat it up, you're losing some of the yeast.
Uh-huh.
If you like certain types of grapes, every single grape has about 50,000 yeast particles in there.
Wow.
But not all grapes. But there are certain kinds of grapes
Mhm.
that, I mean, all of them will have some, but there are certain grapes that are just much more easy to make wine out of.
Mhm.
Because I'm wild fermenting mine. You're adding package yeast,
Mhm.
and sometimes people will use the champagne yeast. There's a lot of different kinds.
I've
Now,
used baker's yeast.
I think you could, because even the champagne yeast, they're natural.
Huh?
You're just buying them in the store.
Right.
You can actually buy a champagne yeast. I haven't
yeah.
seen
Yeah, it's a
anything
little-
other than.
Yeah, it's a little packet. You might have
Okay.
to find it online depending on where you live,
Mm-hmm.
but there's several different kinds.
Mm-hmm.
But because I'm wild fermenting, I need all the yeast I can have. So that's why my fruit all goes into bags, mesh bags that I can float into that on my big crock with the water. And I'm always using either like water that I've let set so the chlorine's out. It's dechlorinated water.
Mhm.
You could use spring water. Just some pure water. You don't want any chlorine in there,
Right.
and so you just let it sit there. And filtered water would work.
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of filtered water.
Okay.
So basically, mine has the fruit, it has the sugar, it has the water, and a lot of times I'll put fresh lemons in there.
Oh.
I've just found that the juice from some fresh lemons can, I mean, it's optional. I'm not saying that you have to do it. I just have found that it helps.
Okay.
And
Anything
so,
that helps.
See that. Uh-huh.
yeah, and then, you have to cover that crock, but every day, 4 or 5 times a day, I'm stirring it because I'm trying to pull as much yeast out of the air.
Okay.
Casey's is easier because he's just adding the yeast packet.
Yeah. Remember I said the cheater, pumpkin eater kind of.
That's okay. Hey, look, that sounds great.
I'm thinking I want to try Sandy's. I may.
And I'm thinking I want to try
some.
Casey's.
There's actually some good books out on wild. I'm thinking of this one. It's got this crazy design that I got back home. I have back home, and I think it's called Wild Wines and Mead.
Ooh.
And it's all recipes about using the yeast out of the air, and what's on your fruit.
Awesome.
Wow.
That sounds absolutely amazing.
But for me, I find it just really rewarding,
Mhm.
And I mean, my kids just think it's the funnest thing that when they come to visit, I'm giving them different bottles of.
Of course they
wines.
do. Mama's
But-
wine.
But like
Well-
Monica's got all those grapes.
Mhm.
Why not? After you've made all your jams, everything that you're going to make. I don't know if you make grape pie or not, but that's really pretty good.
Well, now.
You could trade. You could say, I got grape wine here. What
Yeah.
can we trade with my neighbor?
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about that before the podcast, because I was like, okay, so what's the benefits of being able to make wine to me? But if I'm not drinking wine, what's the benefit of me having it? Why would somebody say, oh, I really should listen to this episode because I should learn how to make wine but I don't drink wine. So it's really not a big deal. Well, maybe you can use wine in other ways. Maybe you can make yourself a red wine vinegar, or
Right.
maybe you make wine so that you can use it as a bartering tool, because it's great. And it's not even, Anne was like, yeah, we were talking a little bit about maybe if everything kind of goes haywire and everything goes south, then you have it as bartering tools, right? The biggest bartering tools for preppers. What do they have?
Right.
They've got, cigarettes, they got smokes and alcohol, but,
Mhm.
but it doesn't have to be if it's all bad. Like Sandy was saying too, you can just say, hey, this person's got a bunch of apples maybe, and I want some
Right.
apples. So, hey, I'm going to give you a bottle of wine if I can have maybe a couple buckets of apples. I mean,
I come get some apples.
yeah, somebody has something that you want, barter for it. I mean, we do that with other stuff we have now anyway. And it's not like it's, the end times right now. So
That's right.
you can
Right.
barter no matter what time of year it is. And so, yeah, that's a great way to barter.
Yeah,
Sounds
but
good.
Cool.
it's so crazy when you start researching making your own homemade wine,
Mhm.
because like Casey, Pinot Noir, different white wines, that's what he's looking for.
Mhm.
For me, it's strawberry wine, rhubarb wine, chokecherry wine, a rhubarb wine. Any fruit that I have made. When you make it pear wine, it's they call it a little bit different, but I have to tell you that is some of the best. They call it Perry, but it is just a pear.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, unbelievable.
Sounds delicious.
You
But
just sounded like a Lainey Wilson song there with Strawberry Wine.
So pear wine, can I just use it if I have homemade like pear juice that I've gotten from pears?
Absolutely.
yes, but then you're going to have to add.
The
The
yeast.
yeast.
Did you can it?
Like I don't know if I don't know if I even have any left, but if I canned pear juice, because I do have access to pears at some point
Right.
through the season. If I get those pears, can I can the juice and then do the wine later? Or do I immediately say, okay, I can use this for that now?
Well, both ways.
Okay.
If you're going to use it with just you're chopping up your pears,
Yeah.
you're putting them in a mesh bag,
Mhm.
you can use the wild fermentation. If you want to make juice, you're going to use the little packets of
Mhm.
yeast.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
so let's just say I've been inundated with a bunch of fruit. I want to make wine from this fruit, but I don't have time right now. It's okay because I can the juice from this fruit and possibly still make wine out of it later. I just have to I have to add the yeast from the store or bought yeast because
Right.
I can't really catch that wild yeast at that
Right.
point. So,
Right.
but if I'm trying to plan things out, then I can say, okay, let me get this skill down first with canning and preserving all this fruit.
Mhm.
And I can try to still do the wine. It just has to be a little bit
Yeah.
help.
The
Just a little help.
the one thing that I would always stress,
Mhm.
everything has to be sanitized.
Yes.
Your crocks, your
Okay.
bottles, everything has to be. And could you use like a Clorox? You could, but really they make a sanitizer for when you're making wine or you're making beer, a mead. It doesn't cost very much, and I think you're better off using that
Right.
Okay.
just for safety things.
I think a lot of times.
There's one that goes into your dishwasher too. Like it
Yeah.
looks like a little tablet, like you would put a dishwasher detergent in your dishwasher. And
Yeah.
I always, when I bottled my wines, I dishwashed it, but I used
Use
this
that sanitizer.
sanitizer thing that is made for beer bottles or wine or any of that. So it is important. That's a good point, Sandy, to make sure you sanitize.
So that kind of brings the story to full circle where Jesus turned the water into wine because
Yeah.
they were talking about that being such a major compliment
Yeah.
to how good your wine is that you serve to your guest. And he made the best, of course. So we're making our own homemade, which is really, really cool. So,
But everybody, thanks so much for joining us on making water into wine. It's just a tiny glimpse of what's possible. Okay. You can't just take it from what we've said tonight. You need to do some research. You need to get some recipes. Talk to
Yes.
people that have made some wine, because you want to be successful in that.
Mhm.
And it's it's amazing. It can be a little addictive to when you start making wine because you want to try. Well, I got berries and I got carrots and I want to make some carrot wine and I want to make all these complex herb wines. I want to
Oh.
do all these different things.
Cool.
So do some research. Um, if you want to hear more about that, if you'd like us to do videos on all of us trying to make a different kind of wine, just give us some comments and let us know what you'd like. But we so appreciate you stopping by.
Yes.
Always on Monday mornings, you're going to be able to see us live on YouTube, or you can hear us on all kinds of platforms. Yay. And
Yes.
and then the Tuesday after, the next day, we are always going to be talking about our episodes.
There we
So
go.
thanks so much for coming in, and thanks for Casey at Ormsby Farm, and at Andale Homestead, and Monica at Bland's Promised Land Ranch. And I'm Sandy at Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.